Awesome stuff. Reminding you guys all about the ebook, so don't leave straight after he's done. And I'm going to leave it up to you. Not much of an introduction to be done. You can do that yourself.
It's the best intro. Hey guys, my name's Hugh. I've met a couple of you, and you look incredibly familiar.
I think we met through Nick Key or something.
Yes,
yeah, that's the one.
I have to get this. I was going to bug me the whole time. Hey guys, yeah. So I'm going to talk about getting started with WordPress development. Just a show of hands, who's kind of worked with WordPress before from a development perspective, not like setting up, it's not just like installing a plugin. Cool. And who would like to work with develop with WordPress? If you have? Oh, that's good. Cool. I think I'll just start off telling you how I got to working with WordPress. When I was a kid, like high school, I started making websites for my friends' bands in HTML, which was fun because I was never in the bands. I just made websites for them. So I was like the guy who hung out next to the band, hoping people would think he's cool, but I wasn't. So I just taught myself HTML, look at websites, view source, this tag does that, all that kind of stuff. I'm sure a lot of you guys have done that sort of thing when you're young. I don't know. Maybe I was the guy who sat at home with no friends doing it. From there, I just moved on to PHP, which is logical progression. I actually got a job at a local agency called Whiteboard Web, which was kind of connected with RSOWeb and all of that. I think they've since been absorbed by RSOWeb, if I'm not mistaken. Because I knew the HR manager, so I got a job. And I knew no PHP until I started there, so that was great. When we worked in MVC frameworks, we had actually a kind of one of those sort of modified form of cake called muffin. We used that. I didn't name it, that was there. So we used MVC frameworks, that was the main thing. And I was there for a while. I moved on to a couple of things, and I eventually got into WordPress very begrudgingly at first, because I was like, why would I want to use a CMS when I can, write using my own framework or MVC frameworks, and it seems so much more powerful. Until I sort of discovered what you can actually do with WordPress. So I was very, very anti it for quite a while, until I discovered what is actually possible. And since I got into WordPress, I moved to a company called Woo Themes, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. We build WordPress themes and plugins. Themes are much less so these days, even though it's in our name. That's a company that's Hero. He's a little ninja guy. He's got like a whole backstory. It's crazy. He's got this like a long story about his history, and it's all completely made up. It's brilliant. We have very interesting content creators. That's where I work. We're actually based in Woodstock, but we have I think 12 of us here in Cape Town, but there's about 50 odd people in the company all over the world. So we're actually a 100% remote company. Even though we have a head office, we're still fully remote. I mean, I work from home almost every day. I go into the office maybe half a day a week or something. Nice. It's pretty cool. So yeah, it's pretty cool. That's where I work. That's what we do. My job there, I've been there for 3 years now. Up until the end of last month, I was working as a developer. I was actually lead developer for the past year on a product called Sensei, which is a plugin for WordPress that you can run courses online. You can basically create a whole school online, which is pretty cool. I was lead on that, and since the beginning of this month, I moved into a role I created the role, called Community Engagement Manager, which basically means I manage our relationship with the WordPress and open source communities. I basically said, this is the job I want, give it to me, and then about a year and a half later I got it, so that was fun. Another thing I do, I'm very involved with the WordPress Cape Town community. I organize our annual WordCamp every year. Well, I say I do, I mean it's a team of people. I'm just very bad at delegating. We organize our annual WordCamp, which is a WordPress conference. There happen hundreds of them all over the world every year in different communities. I do the Cape Town one. We have meetups going on, not as regular as I'd like, but that's what we do. So I'm very involved in the community as well. But moving on to what we're talking about tonight. So what I'm going to talk about is getting started with WordPress development, which generally means plugin development, because that's how you add stuff to WordPress. And I'm going to talk about kind of 3 main things: the fold structure, headers, and events. Events is actually the main thing. The first 2 are just so you know what's going on. Because basically how WordPress works, you've got the core software, and you can install plugins, and you can install themes. You can have one theme running at a time, obviously, because that's what your site looks like. Can't have more than one, because that's just doesn't make sense. Plugins can be as many as you like on your site. In theory, lots of plugins is bad for your site, but actually it depends how well they're written.
I was told that you could have a theme inside a theme.
Well, you can have a child theme, which is, I'm not going to get into theming now. And we almost made a plugin where you could have a grandchild theme. It's very weird. But I'm not going to talk about that tonight. That's all more complicated. That doesn't really matter either. Thanks. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about some plugin development, and basically, there's obviously so much you can talk about for ages and ages about this. When it comes to the events, which is what I'm going to talk about in a bit, once you understand the stuff there, you can pretty much do whatever you want with WordPress. You can bend WordPress to your will. That would have actually been a much better name for this talk. I'll do that next time. You can pretty much do anything you want with WordPress once you know this stuff. It's an incredibly flexible and powerful platform, even though some people think it isn't. Once you understand the stuff we're doing today, then yeah, you'll see what I mean. I also have some shirts from my company, which are pretty cool,
Nice.
which I can give out.
Yes.
It says "Ship Your Idea" because I was like, use our products that ship your idea. It's pretty cool, and it's like a skull, so it's kind of rock and roll. And I have a hoodie which someone can with hero on it. It's really cool. It is XXL because the only ones we had left, but they're kind of small sizes. So I don't know. If you ask a cool question, I'll give you one.
Mine was a cool.
Well, what size shirt do you want?
The smallest you've got.
There's an XS.
I saw a medium.
There's extra small. There's small.
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 Yeah.
There you go. Okay, so first thing, folder structure. In WordPress, every WordPress installation has a folder called WP content/plugins. There's also next to that there's themes and uploads. Plugins, and that's where all the plugins are stored. Plugins, you can actually call the folder that your plugin is in anything you like, but the naming convention I should stick to because it just makes sense and there's conventions for a reason, I'm sure you'll know. The slug of your plugin. So if your plugin is called, I don't know, give me a name for something.
Salutation.
That. so it's called Salutation Plugin is the name of your plugin. Just lowercase, hyphens, spaces, that's just like simple. Pretty standard. And then inside the plugin folder, you've got a PHP file and a readme.txt. The readme is actually only so if you put your plugin on the WordPress.org repo of the plugin, there's over, I think, almost 40,000 plugins on there now. If you want to add it to that, you have to have a readme file. For your plugin to operate, all you actually need is just one PHP file. You can obviously add as many as you like to that in CSS and JavaScript and everything, but the bare minimum is just that. And that can actually be called anything you want, but once again, the name convention is the slug of your plugin. But because it can be anything you want, there's basically set headers you have to have in the file for WordPress to recognize that that is your plugin's index file. So that's folder structure, very, very basic. Headers for your plugin. This is at the top of that plugin index file. Everything, it must always look like this. The only thing you actually need is the plugin name. If you don't know the version, you'll get a weird display in WordPress, but it'll still work, and everything else is optional. But it's all important. This is from I've got a podcasting plugin that's doing relatively well. This is the header from the latest version. So name of the plugin, version number, URL to get to the plugin, description, and then other details. These two are related to WordPress, so that's the minimum version of WordPress required. And that's the version it's been tested up to. For this plugin, actually, you could go back to about 3.5, I think, but I sort of bump it up to encourage people to update, because some people are lazy about that. And 4.2 is actually coming out tomorrow, I think. Well, I think it's American today, so now. I think 4.2 is coming out, and I've already tested it, that's what I said. But the reason you do that is when someone is updating your plugin, it will tell them this plugin is compatible with your version of WordPress or not. So if I haven't updated that, then once people update to 4.2, they'll get a warning saying my plugin is incompatible, which obviously I don't want. And this here, text domain and domain path, that's purely for, you can allow people to translate text strings in your plugins. And that's, you just use a text domain so that they can target those strings via PO-Edit or other translation software. I don't know how much that stuff extends outside the WordPress world, but yeah. But I'm not going to go into translations today, localization and translation today, because that's there's a lot. So yeah, once you've got your plugin index file, you put your headers like that, you're good to go. Like I said, all you really need is the name. As long as that's there, WordPress will recognize that this is where your plugin starts. And then your code can start below that, then you can include any other files you want, you can do anything you want from there. But the main thing I want to talk about is events. In PHP, you've got call user func, I'm sure you've seen. I always like saying that out loud, call user func, because it sounds cool. I don't know how other people pronounce it, but that's how I pronounce it. I don't know, it's meant to be pronounced differently. But that's a built-in PHP function. In WordPress, you've got these two functions that are effectively wrappers for that. Well, do actions more of a wrapper, apply filters is similar, but I'll get to that. So instead of that, you have this, which is how WordPress handles all of its events, anything that you make happen. And once you know how to use these two functions, then you can do anything you like in WordPress, like absolutely anything. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. The first one are what we call hooks or actions, which is where do action comes in. Throughout WordPress, if you look through the code, you'll see lines like this, do action, and then just a string in there. And there might be some other parameters after that, I'll get to that in a bit, but there's always just a string there. And that's what we call the hook. And that could be absolutely anything. Like the common hook is one called init, which I'll show on the next slide, INIT. And what that is just a hook that runs at the beginning of, like, as the page is loading, before anything's being printed out, before headers have been echoed out. So you can add stuff over there and make it happen. Now how you do that, wherever there's do action for a hook, you can, in your plugin, you can write add action, use that same hook, and then define a function. And whatever is in this function will run where that occurs in the code. Does that make sense? Cool. So basically what will happen, code will go, it will run like normal, it will get to a do action function. It'll find everything that's added onto that hook via add action. It will run all of those, and then it'll carry on with the code after the do action call. So you can, and those are throughout WordPress, do action calls, they're everywhere. And when you write plugins, it's also good practice to put those in a logical place as well, so other people can hook into your plugin if they want to add on stuff themselves. Yeah, there's more complicated stuff we're getting onto, but that's a basic add action call. The name of the hook, you name your function, and then you define your function. You can also, if your function is inside an object, inside a class, you can just find an array. First item in the array is the object, second item is the name of the method. So otherwise it works exactly the same. And so this is how it would work. Like I said, init is a popular one just because init is fired before anything's output to the page. So if you want to do something that's going to print out headers, you need to do it here, or print, you know what I mean, anything like that. So init function, and you define your function, and you can do whatever you want in there. You can do absolutely anything you like. This code can just sit like that in your plugin index file, and it will work. It's generally best practice to include it in a separate class file, just because code and object oriented makes more sense, but you can do it at a certain priority. You can make something come in after it, and then that global variable then be available. Yeah. Does that all make sense? You do action, all the add actions in order, and then you carry on with the process.
Excuse me, is the priority number measured in what units? Is that seconds, minutes, or whatever?
No, it's not a timer. It's just a count. It's just the order.
Ranking.
It's a ranking of order. That's all it is. It's not a timer. It's just an order. And if a whole bunch of things have the same priority, then they run in the order that they appear in the code.
Oh, all right.
And the default order in WordPress, you've got all your WordPress core stuff, and then plugins are effectively run in alphabetical order. Yeah.
Is it possible to sort of, before actually defining adding your function, so that you get the lowest value of the priority, like maybe get lowest or get the highest value?
Of one that how it's currently being used.
Yes, like if someone sets minus 1,000, so I can get that value and make mine minus.
That would be a very useful. That doesn't exist as far as I know, but that would be a very useful thing to be able to find out. Nice thing about WordPress is open source. If you can work it out, you can write a patch and submit it to call, and it's fun. But yeah, that would actually be very useful. There is nothing like that.
Okay.
You can do a lot of stuff by trial and error. I mean, as PHP, you write it, you refresh your browser, see what happens. Like,
how does it save those values?
What?
Does it stack them on? How does it actually? Is it like sort of, because I know WordPress uses global variables.
Yeah.
Does it sort of stack that in a global variables, or how does it?
What it does, the do action function.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the first parameter, which is the hook.
Yes.
What it will do then is it will find every add action that has that hook, find all of them, then sort them by their priority, and then run them. So,
but I mean that add action, right? It calls it's a certain function, which basically takes.
Oh,
the
got you.
first,
Yeah.
yes.
Sorry. I get you.
It
It sets it in a global variable. Yeah. There's a global variable functions available, and what hook they run on, and then while the hook is firing, there's a global variable set. So this hook is currently running.
So basically, can you? So in what I'm saying is that you can actually get that global variable and get the lowest value or the highest value.
You could. It'll probably be fairly costly because you've got a big array to run through of stuff, but it would be theoretically possible. Might be a bit slow, but it would work.
Okay.
That would make sense.
T-shirt, bro.
Yeah. You what size are you? Medium.
Medium.
Medium. We've got a few. Someone unfolded these, and I can't see the labels. So
Thank you.
so that's a good point. And the fourth thing you can send to your add action call is parameters. So by default, that's actually 0. If it's 0 or 1, you can leave it up. If it's anything over that, you need to include it. So if your hook, it has parameters as part of it. So say you've got a hook that says do action. The first parameter is just the name of the hook, and then the next parameter is just a variable or a number or a string or whatever. Then that's a parameter that will be passed to your callback function. So if the hook has 2 parameters, you have to specify that it has 2, and then you have to specify them in your function arguments. If you don't specify that number and those, then you get errors of undefined arguments. I think it's a fatal error. But yeah, if the hook has parameters, you have to give a number and you have to say what they are. Even if you're not going to use them in your function, you have to define them in arguments. And you don't really have to set defaults for these because the hook will send the defaults through anyway. I often do just for good practice, but you don't really need to. It's sort of unnecessarily verbose. And then once you're in there, you've got the values of these, and you can do whatever you want with them, obviously.
Excuse me, did you say I should include them in the parameters even if I'm not going to use them in
Yeah.
the function?
If you put a number here, and that number doesn't match the amount of arguments there, you'll get a fatal error.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you actually have to include them, because it'll look for that many arguments, and if it can't find that many, it'll say something's gone wrong. Yeah, so when you call add action, that's the extent of the add action function. There's no more parameters needed than that. The only difference, like I said, is this could be an array of an object and method instead of just a function, which I would normally always do, but just for the sake of clarity in an example, it's easier to not. And also, array wouldn't have fit on the screen. It would like wrap onto a second line, and that's just ugly code. Yeah, so that's the parameters and actions. Is all that pretty clear so far?
Yeah.
Cool. All these slides will be available afterwards, so you can run through this stuff. The next event is what we call filters. They're very, very similar to actions. The only difference is filters must always return a value. Actions, you don't have to return anything. Actually, returning thing means nothing. You may as well not return anything, it doesn't make a difference. Filters must always return a value. And the reason for this is what a filter does, it modifies a variable. So a value will get passed to your filter, and what you return is what that variable now is. So this apply filters, you'll see just like do action is, you'll see apply filters, and that's the name of the filter, which is equivalent to the hook in do action. But there'll always be at least one parameter, always. And the reason for that is because this value is being passed, and whatever your function is that you've hooked onto it, whatever your callback function is, it'll modify that variable. You'll see an example now, so it might make a bit more sense. But so say you've got an array and you want to allow people to add onto that array dynamically from a plugin. You just say apply filters, you give it a name, you say my array filter or whatever you want to call it, and you pass your array as only variable. Then when someone uses add filter, just like add action, use add filter, they say my array filter, they give a function, and in that function they can modify, they can add to that array or take away from it, and then return the array at the end. If you don't return the array, it'll just become a null variable. So you can actually filter something and then not return, and it'll make it null. If you want to do that, that's probably bad practice, but I guess you can. Rather than return null, just for consistency. So just as an example, here's one for body class. This is the class in the body tag on every front-end page. There's a filter in WordPress called body class. And what body class has passed to it is just one variable, and that's an array of classes that will be in the body tag, CSS classes. It'll be in the HTML classes, rather. It'll be in the body tag. So you can say add filter, body class, your function, and then because it's a filter, the first parameter is always the variable you're modifying. There you've got your first parameter there, and because there's only one, you don't actually need to specify the amount of parameters. You only need to specify that if it's 2 or more. If it's 0 or 1, you don't need to specify it. And with filters, there has to be one for a filter, otherwise it's not a filter. So there will always be one, at least. If you add more onto that, you can use those to provide context or anything else. So classes, so that's the array of the classes. Well, I've just added another class onto the array like that, and I return classes, so now the body classes have whatever was already there previously plus my class. And then those all added into the body tag. That's just one filter. There's stacks of all over WordPress, and it's also, once again, it's good practice to include these in your code. If you've got any variables or anything that would be good to be able to extend or modify, it's good practice to wrap them in and apply filters for call. Does that make sense? there's a bit of a sort of hacky secret is that apply filters, or add filter and add action, you can use them interchangeably. It's bad practice, but you can use them. You can use add action here and it'll do the same thing, because they actually end up calling the same thing. So it's sort of cheating, and it makes your code harder to read because it looks like it's action, but it's actually a filter. But you can do that. Don't do it though. So you can, but don't. Yeah.
But are you implying that if you were using an add action, you would have anyway have had a line somewhere saying filter with body class mentioning it?
Sorry, I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, let's go back to the previous slide where you had the filter. Okay, you have an apply filter there.
Yeah.
Now you say you could follow up with an add action,
Yeah.
but you must have had an apply filter. If
Yeah.
you-
So apply filters looks for add filter and add action on that filter.
Exactly.
It looks for both. I don't really know why it does that. I think it's WordPress core has a strong requirement for backwards compatibility. And there's probably something in the previous version where that happened, like kind of by accident, and now they sort of kept it for backwards compatibility purposes. It doesn't really make too much difference. It doesn't really add any overhead to the code. It just, I shouldn't have told you that. Now it's confusing. So forget that. Cool. Does that all make sense? Aside from that, does that all make sense? Cool. Another thing you can do is you can actually remove actions and filters, even if it's something from WordPress core itself. So say you don't, say in some other plugin, they've added a class to the body. I'm just using that one because it's a very easy filter to example. There's like hundreds and hundreds of them all over WordPress. And you don't want that class in the body anymore. So then somewhere they've got a thing, it says add filter, they've got body class, and they've got a function. And you can just say the same thing. You should copy that line and change it to remove filter, and it'll be gone. As long as the function, as long as the filter and the function name are identical, and also if there's a priority, as long as the priority matches. If you use remove filter or remove action with a different priority, it won't remove it.
Okay.
And like as always, the default priority is 10. So if there wasn't one specified, you can say 10 or nothing, and it'll still work.
Why would you remove them? You say, is it like event listeners that's been that's been done? So now there's events that been added like event listeners. So in order to remove them, it will take away resources. Why would you remove them? It's just.
I guess you would do it if you're trying to. I'm trying to think of a practical example because I have used it very, very rarely. I don't really use it very often because I don't need it often.
Would it be for a plugin conflict if you know a particular plugin, you've got your podcasting thing and you've got to add, I don't know, SoundCloud thing, and you know that the SoundCloud one is screwing up your one?
Yeah, I could add that and it would remove that from that.
You could remove it.
Generally speaking, I can't really think of any use case where you would need to use remove action or remove filter on a core filter or a core action. But if it's added by another plugin and that plugin developer didn't do it very well, or conflicts with yours, or if it does something you just don't really want, that's kind of the way more where you would use it. But it does make it a bit costly because then it calls the filter and then later on removes it. So it's kind of a pointless loop in the end. But if you can't modify the other plugin, that's the only way you can do it from within yours. Makes sense. Would you like a shirt? Size?
A large one.
Large.
A bigger one is possible. Rather.
There's extra large.
Okay.
I wear large and it's quite tight on me. They're very like small sizes.
Okay. Thanks, man.
We have a whole lot of them at the office. I thought I would bring them.
That's great.
Otherwise they're so good, it's going to waste. So this is what I thought. This is a full plugin. That's a complete plugin that works. It's a completely pointless plugin. There's no reason why you'd ever need it, but it totally works. So say you've got your plugin file, you've got your plugin index file, plugin slide.php. I've called the plugin Google Redirect because that's just what it does. You get, like I said, you can leave out the version string, but you'll get a weird sort of markup display on when you look at the plugins list in the dashboard because it's meant to be a version string. I think it messes the layout a bit, but it doesn't break it. So I put that in, and then added action on init because that's before headers have been sent, so you can do redirect. Called a function called Google Redirect, and basically if that get variable is set, then do a redirect and then exit. That's it. Basically redirect to google.com. And you can specify the type of redirect. It actually defaults to 302. I just thought I'd be a bit more verbose there. It's like I said, obviously completely pointless, but if you just paste that code into a plugin, that'll work. That'll do its thing. And that's actually how easy it is to write a plugin for WordPress. As long as you know where you want to hook stuff on, which you can just look through WordPress core code and find it. As long as you know where to hook it on, then you can do whatever you want. And so you can see, like, once you understand the events, these actions and filters, you can do anything with WordPress, like absolutely anything. And there's actually a very useful page, I think the next slide will put a link to it, but it's called the action reference. It basically lists every action and the order that they fire in WordPress core. It's on the WordPress codex. It's incredibly useful because you can see when things fire, when objects are set up. Like if you're looking at a specific page or blog post, the post object is only set up at a certain point, so you know where it is and all that kind of stuff. And the action reference is incredibly useful. I go to it all the time just to get orders of actions and everything. It's incredibly useful. So, is that clear? Yeah.
You said that I'm not exactly sure how WordPress works, but you said that it has core files. But is this core plugin files?
How do you mean?
Like core action files.
Oh yeah. When I say core, I mean WordPress. The WordPress software itself. Is if you install WordPress with no plugins. When I say core, I refer to WordPress itself. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So just another question. Say, how would you recommend? Say, there was this issue where we have, say, someone is on Facebook already, right? If they on this other tab, I'm on Facebook. I'm logged in.
Yeah.
Now, what I want to do is that I'm integrating Facebook authentication. Now, I want when I open the site.
On
So
WordPress.
yes. When I open the WordPress site, so that it should, if I'm logged in already on Facebook, it should automatically log me in. Where is the best place to? What hook should I call?
I'll do that. I'll do that on Init. To be honest, the reason is you would need to redirect to Facebook, check the login, and then redirect back.
Yes. Is Init the first hook?
It's not first, but it's the first one. It's the first hook that comes in after. Actually, it's a second. It's the hook that comes in after the WordPress object is set up, which is basically the query that gets all the data for your current page and any other info about WordPress is all set up by the time init comes, which is why it's incredibly useful. So don't have to use a get variable. You could go on init and say if the post that's currently being shown, if it has this ID, and you have that available to you here. If you did a previous hook, you wouldn't have that available.
Okay.
So init is for anything that you have to run before headers printed out. It's generally the one you would use.
So the best thing would be to put the priority there because there might be other.
Yeah, if you want to do something like that, put a priority of 1.
Okay.
So then that bring them back in.
Okay.
But then you don't want them to, every time they load the page, to be sent to Facebook and come back.
No,
so
no. The thing is like you would do a check, like if there's already an existing WordPress session.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Then you would just bypass.
Yeah, and then by the time you get to init, the session's set up. Whoever's logged in, all the functions you can to find out who's logged in. That's all available to you.
Yes.
There's a function called get current user, and it'll give you all their user info, and that'll return false if no one's logged in, and that's available by init. So, yeah, that's the best place to use that.
What is the lowest priority that you can assign?
You go as low as you like, because the higher the number, the lower priority. So you could set it to 1 million, and then it would run last.
I mean, like, what's the lowest digit that you can?
You can go into negative figures actually.
Oh, okay.
When it works, people never really do, but you can. It's kind of bad practice because it looks a bit silly, but you can. Like if something's set to go on a priority of 1, it's probably for a very good reason. And if you try and go before that, it's probably for a very bad reason. I mean, unless it's some other plugin that's done it to on 1 just to try and make this stuff kind of happen more, and then that plugin's done it badly, then but yeah, you can actually put negative figures so it can go as far as you like. It can, I mean, you can go as far as you like.
It's the global variable for that is the integer.
Sorry?
It's the int.
Yeah. Do you want to show it?
Okay.
I've got like 10 of them here, so may as well give them out. Cool. So that's bringing all that together. I don't know what time it is. Oh, that's cool. These are some helpful links. The first one is if you're WordPress plugin develop info. If you're submitting a plugin to the WordPress repo, like I said, there's about 40,000 odd plugins in there. I've got 12 on there. That about page is incredibly useful. It basically tells you how you must format your readme.txt file. I didn't go into that now because you can look at that and you can copy and paste the example and just edit the data. I don't need to run through that yet. And then loads of other stuff like how you must translate your strings and all of that. That's all in there. It's incredibly useful. The WordPress coding standards, if you don't stick to the standards, nothing breaks. Everything's fine. But standards are standards for a reason. And it's very good to keep your plugins and themes looking like WordPress itself. the ironic thing is that WordPress itself doesn't always stick to the coding standards because the standards are sort of introduced a bit later on, and some of the older code still hasn't stuck to that. And they don't really accept patches for purely updating code to fit standards. If that's all the patches, they don't really accept it. It has to actually do something as well. So while people are fixing things or adding features, they sort of fix the standards as they go. So give it a year, and maybe all of WordPress core will be adhere to its own standards. And the good coding standards for PHP, JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Like you'll see how, like how space stuff out here, like spaces after that, spaces there, all of that's part of the coding standards. A lot of people don't like all the spaces in WordPress. I think it's too spacey. But I like it. It makes it look cleaner. But all of that's because that's part of the coding standards. Cool. Yeah. Action reference, like I said before, is a list of all the actions in core. I think it is actually all of the ones in core. Obviously, actions, because any plugin can add an action. There could be stacks more actions or do action calls in any plugin. But the ones in core, so you can see what order they run in, and there's also info about them, what parameters they pass, all of that kind of stuff. And that's an incredibly useful page. There's also one that's filter reference, but it's slightly less useful because it kind of filters you sort of use on an as-needed basis. You're going to be using actions and more. And how you would normally use that, what I've done here is very basic. It's very procedural, it's very raw, it's not very pretty. What I would probably have done is include a class file or have a class inside here, and then I pretty much would add every add action call inside the constructor. Do everything inside there, and then the methods all are referred to from that. And instead of a function, I've got an array with the first thing just being this and then the method. And I don't put all that inside the constructor and then everything inside there. For me, that's much neater, much cleaner way to do it. And to that end, a while ago, I made a WordPress plugin template that I made it for myself, really. So whenever I start a new plugin, I just clone this repo, and I've got a script that renames everything to be my new plugin's name. And that's inside there, and that's public. Other people have used it and found it helpful. I've had some people submit patches to it. It's a very good base to start from. I think it's very good because I wrote it. But it's got a lot of useful stuff in, like if you want to add a settings page to your plugin, that's all part of it. Some people think that makes it less lean, but I like having it there. You delete it if you don't need it. And everything's set in classes. It's all object oriented, so it's a nice way to get going. There's plenty of other things like that. There's one called WordPress plugin boilerplate, which is very, very popular. I think if you go to WPBP, plugin WPPB, WordPress plugin boilerplate, .io, I think. You can generate a new plugin based on the boilerplate, but it's much more object-oriented than mine, and it's very abstracted, and it gets quite big. If you like that kind of thing, it works well. There's plenty of other plugin templates like that. I just made that for myself, and I put it on GitHub because why not? And other people have liked it. So. And then Gareth earlier mentioned Vagrant, which I chatted some earlier about as well, but Vagrant's basically you can run what effectively feels like a live server on your local machine. There's actually a version of Vagrant called Varying Vagrant Vagrants, or VVV, which you can get off GitHub. It was actually built by a company called 10up, their WordPress agency. They built it to speed up their local WordPress development. So it's a version of Vagrant that comes packaged with WordPress. The WordPress core from the WordPress core SVN repo trunk is all checked out as part of it. So you can actually submit patches to core very easily, just create a diff and submit. And I won't go into submitting patches to core because it's a whole other thing. But it's all, so if you install Vagrant, you run the VVV script, which is in the repo, it'll do everything for you. And then you've got a local copy of WordPress to play with. And it sets up the database and everything. And there's another script you can just create, it makes a new WordPress site for you as many times as you like. Very helpful for doing client work.
Aside from WooCommerce, what are the best 3 plugins that you guys make? Just because I only know WooCommerce and FlexSlider.
FlexSlider is a JavaScript library, which we bought. We have WooSlider, which is a WordPress plugin that employs FlexSlider. We've got WooCommerce is an e-commerce plugin for WordPress. That's our flagship product, even though it's free. So that's interesting. But we basically sell extensions for it, which is where we make money off it. And it's recently crossed 7 million downloads. That's not 7 million installs, because that's downloads. Every time someone downloads an updated version, it counts as another download. The numbers are a bit vague on how many active installs there are, because it's very difficult to determine because of development sites and stuff. It's probably close to 2 million active installs on live servers at the moment.
What about WooDojo?
WooDojo, it's busy being canned.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, WooCommerce is the most popular one. The one I was working on until very recently, Sensei. That I would say is also one of the most popular ones. The reason it's not as popular as WooCommerce is because it's not free. I think it's a single license, like $120 or something. And then the extensions are free as opposed to WooCommerce, the other way around. So that's very popular, but just because it's premium, people are less likely to buy it, even though we have 30-day money back guarantee.
And what does it do?
Sensei. It allows you to run like basically a school online. So courses with lessons, modules to group your lessons. You can run quizzes, different question types, all that kind of stuff. There's other software that does that. This one works on WordPress. There's a couple other WordPress plugins that do it, but ours is better because it's outside. I worked on it for a year.
Don't you also have like a t-shirt designing plugin as well?
I think there's a WooCommerce extension that you can kind of design products and it'll be interesting and then buy that product.
Yeah.
Basically, just so you know, I'm talking about WooCommerce and e-commerce plugin. It's very basic. Well, it's not very basic. It's very brilliant. But it's it does kind of like it sets you up an online store and you can put products and you can sell them, different types of products. You can sell them all. That is brilliant. But if you want to add additional functionality like a t-shirt design or stuff, that's obviously not going to be part of core because you've got this bloated plugin that does a whole lot of stuff that only some people want. That's what the extensions are for. And we call them extensions, but they're actually just WordPress plugins. We just call them extensions because they sort of depend on another plugin. So, but you install them just like you install any WordPress plugin. So. But that's kind of like our main business model at WooThemes. And we've got a huge ecosystem around it. We've got loads of our WooCommerce extensions we sell on our site are built by third-party developers. We've got like a selling agreement with them and all that. So it's a massive ecosystem around that people build plugins, people build extensions for WooCommerce and wouldn't even know them, and it's that kind of thing, which is quite cool.
To come back to your plugins, I'm assuming there's no reason why you couldn't make your add action conditional, right?
How do you mean?
Well, you would have at the start of an if, you say if such and such.
You could. You could, but the problem is, if it's like a get variable, the get variable is available from when your script starts running, so that's fine. But say it's in your plugin index file, and you wrap the add action in an if, the problem is often the variable you're looking for isn't available at that point, because plugins are loaded very early on in the order of WordPress, and often like a user object isn't available at that point. So if you want to say if this guy with this user ID is logged in, you won't be able to do that. So what you would normally do is you add your action, and then inside your function, then you would do that check. So it's better to do it inside the function rather than outside. It's also neater. It's a bit cleaner. But yeah, it's better to do it inside the function that your callback function that you're working on instead of around it, just because often that data isn't available. But like I said, if it's a get variable or post variable, something like or server variable, that will always be available, then you may as well just want to look very pretty. And I quite like pretty code.
Okay, so you just accept the overhead and keep it pretty.
Yeah, and it is a small amount of extra overhead, but not really that much. But yeah, obviously every time you hook onto something, it adds another thing. But I mean, it's like another millisecond of load or less. I don't know times, but you know what I mean.
Did you say that if you install the www command line interface, it comes with a copy of WordPress, as in like the download?
Yeah, because basically,
or I have to download it like.
Basically, how WordPress works as an open source project, it's available on a public SVN repo that anyone can just check out. And part of what the www script does, it checks out that repo. So you have to have SVN installed on your computer.
So it checks out the current repo of the WordPress.
Yeah, the current chunk. So it's the current one in development. So it actually checks out a couple of versions of it. I think there's 5 different versions. Current chunk, which is in development, so they'll be ahead of whatever's the latest stable. There will be another version which is the latest stable. And then every time you start up www, just build with your Vagrant app, it checks for the latest versions and downloads, checks out all the latest versions for you and everything. So it's all automated by the command line, which is very, very easy to use. It's actually I'm so not a command line guy. I like GUIs. I don't like the command line, but www is so easy to use that it's brilliant. Yeah.
So what part? Because maybe I want to like interrupt the WordPress part, like if I want to change some stuff. So what part, how can I interact with the www? I mean, like if I want to...
You have to edit the www script. They've got a www.sh, it's a script that does everything. You have to edit that and do what you like. I mean, I'm not sure what you mean, but...
okay, what I'm trying to mean is, for example, if it installs a copy of WordPress, Yeah. Okay, what directory does it save it to? Because that's a command line interface.
It's got its own directory structure in Vagrant, which is independent of VVV. If it's just Vagrant, it's /Vagrant local /www, and then every folder there's a different site, different install. It does it all in there. It's got its own folder structure inside Vagrant, just like MAMP or whatever has its own folder structure.
I think in short, it's just you just have to research on Vagrant to understand how that
because
works.
VVV is built on top of Vagrant. It's not Vagrant does a whole lot of stuff that's without before you get to VVV. Vagrant does like
I mean,
all that stuff.
for better, you can even use Docker, which is way better than Vagrant.
Yeah, VVV is just great because if you do WordPress development, because it's got all the WordPress stuff sorted. And if you're like me and you like working on WordPress and submitting patches back to core itself, then it's great because it's got all that checked out for you. Which is one of the fun things about WordPress, by the way, is that anyone can submit code to it. It won't always get accepted, but anyone can submit code to it, which is pretty cool. And the core development stuff is very active. And first patch I submitted, I had like loads of people help me. Hey, why didn't you do this instead? And I did it. They could have done it themselves in about 5 seconds, but it took me a bit longer because they want to help you learn. So people help. I like open source.
One last question. Say I do not intend to build a plugin.
Yeah.
I go download the plugin and I check the source code. It's written well. So now I want to override some of the functionality there.
Yeah.
So where is the best place to put that? Is it?
If you don't want to do a plugin yourself, but you want to.
Yeah, I just want to install it and
the best
override
place to do that is in your WordPress theme that is currently active. Every theme in its root folder has a file called functions.php. That's inside every theme. If it doesn't have that, the theme won't run.
Mm-hmm.
You can pretty much put anything you like in there. So if there's a filter in this other plugin that you want to override, you can put an add filter inside your theme's functions.php and override it from there.
So I'm asking for the Facebook authentication. Can I, if I put it in the functions.php, then and give it priority, like the highest priority. So is it gonna actually? Is it run first?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
It's the code, the add action call can be anywhere in your code, but it runs based on the priority. You can put it like anywhere you like. It'll still be a priority of 1. If you're just going to install a plugin that already exists, it could be a badly written plugin.
No, so you're going to make it.
Oh,
you're going to make a web app, but you base it on WordPress.
Yeah. Okay. I do that kind of thing a lot. I wouldn't say there's a lot of dangers as such, but there's pitfalls in that. The way you write your code, as long as you write good, secure code, you're fine. There's loads of security functions inside WordPress. There was a recent thing I uncovered, and it wasn't a security flaw actually, but there's a function inside WordPress called add query arg, which you can basically get parameters onto any URL. If you don't specify the URL, it uses the server address variable parameter of the global server variable. You know what I mean? And if you just do that, then that URL isn't escaped properly, so someone could theoretically pass JavaScript to it and do whatever they want. And inside WordPress core, it's not escaped. But you're supposed to inside your plugin, but people weren't because the documentation didn't tell them to. So that kind of thing, if you don't do proper escaping or proper security stuff, that's going to be quite a problem. So if you're writing any WordPress plugin, do a lot of research in security functions. It's very important. I mean, there's loads of stuff available in WordPress that will help you. It makes it very easy to do, but it's important. For me, that's one of the main pitfalls.
So like small things, not like big architectural problems.
No, there's no giant architectural issues. Obviously, if you've got loads and loads, because the resource side, if you've got loads and loads of resources, there's obviously your database will get very big. Database might get slower, throw more resources, more server resources that will help. But that's a concern if you get big. But WordPress scales very, very well for a large amount of data. Yeah, I mean, like take our WeThemes.com, our website. We have 300 odd products, mostly WooCommerce things. Not a huge amount of products compared to what a lot of our customers have. But we have, I think, almost 1 million users. So our users, we're a massive user database. But our site is still it's exceptionally fast. And yeah. I'd recommend anything you do with WordPress, find a good WordPress host. There's a lot of managed, what they call managed WordPress hosts, like WP Engine, Pressable, Pantheon is a new one. It's actually very, very good. People used to work with WP Engine there. There's a bunch of others. Pagely. Basically, what they do, they set up WordPress for you, and they manage it all. So they've got a whole bunch of their server infrastructure is catered towards WordPress. And so if you're doing anything for a client for that, I would recommend always finding a good managed WordPress host and making sure you write good code, which applies to any system you use, really. Yeah, and then make sure your users use proper passwords. I mean, really, that's that's standard stuff. And one really simple thing to do is when you install WordPress, it installs a user with a username of admin. Change that. Otherwise, every WordPress site everyone knows has a user called admin. So change that. And that person has full administrator access to the dashboard. So delete that user rather. It's very simple stuff. It's mostly make sure you write good code, which comes down to pretty much any application. But in terms of scaling and that kind of stuff, WordPress can handle a huge amount of data. That's a good question. Do you want a t-shirt?
I know.
Ah, no, really? Whatever.
How would you somehow link CSS actually to WordPress?
Or call CSS in your plugin or whatever. There's a WordPress has functions called WP on queue style or WP on queue script for JavaScript, and then you just specify the path of the CSS. You can give it a handle, so then you can later on you can uncall it if you want or whatever. You can say what version it is, so it'll cache that version, and you can say what other CSS files it depends on, so it'll be loaded after those ones. There's WordPress functions that do that for you. It's all, if you look on the WordPress codex, this codex of WordPress.org, you'll find documentation for everything, every plugin in WordPress.
Sorry, about hosting, can I have my WordPress maybe plugin or application being hosted in the cloud or something like that?
How do you mean hosted in the cloud?
Right, for example,
it's everything hosted in the cloud.
If I build an app, okay, using WordPress, and then I get it set up, okay, I upload it to, for example, Heroku or Amazon or anything like that.
Well, you have to, as long as it's on a server that can run PHP and MySQL, you can run WordPress, and as long as you can point your DNS to it.
Google App Engine actually lets you run WordPress.
Yeah, it does. Google App Engine now, you can run it on there. As long as you can point a DNS there, and you can run PHP and MySQL, you're okay. You can run WordPress on any normal shared hosting. Pretty much all shared hosting has PHP and MySQL by default. You can run WordPress on that. And WordPress, because of its dedication to backwards compatibility, actually supports, rather ashamedly, almost back to PHP 5.2, which is sometimes to its detriment, but there's a lot of hosts out there who are just a bit rubbish and don't really update the PHP on their servers. So for a user who doesn't really understand anything about that, they go to a host who's cheap. They pay less money. They go to install WordPress, and if it didn't work, it'd be like, would look bad on WordPress, and it's bad for the user. So there's a strong push these days to move it up to at least 5.4 as a minimum requirement for security reasons, and I don't intend to why, but.
Put a big sign, move on to new hosts.
Yeah. Well, there's a guy who actually used to work at WooThemes, Kun Jacobs. He's written a class, it's called WP Update PHP, so that anyone can include in their plugin. You just get the class of the repo, put in your plugin, and then you can say what minimum version your plugin would require, and then it'll give them a notice in the dashboard. You can make it fatal error, or you can make it just a notice, which is quite handy. I started using it in new plugins just as a sort of way to motivate people to tell their host to upgrade.
My memory is being a little bit rusty. Can you perhaps remind me, do any of these links include an overview of the word processing cycle? What I'm getting at is that clearly, for obvious reasons, you've kept your discussion on the main point simple, and the assumption is if you're going to plug in, you're going to plug in at the init stage. But clearly, you're not restricted to that.
Yeah, well, that's what this action reference lists all the hooks and actions available inside WordPress core. Obviously, plugins have their own, and that lists all of them, so you can use any of those at any point. I just use init because it's an easy example.
Of course.
It's a very common one. There's loads of hooks. If I show you that page, it's listed like hundreds.
So it gives you an overview of the word processing cycle.
Yeah.
And the right
and that actually shows them in order that they come in. And it's
very good,
pretty
very
useful.
good.
On one of my client sites, he's got a long, complex form that sends an email and converts the data to PDF and all that. It's written as a TPL file and it's inside the theme.
Yeah.
Is that okay, or should it be like as a standalone plugin?
There's a thing in WordPress that themes are for appearance, plugins are for functionality. You can put any functionality you like inside your theme, and it will still work, but you shouldn't. For obvious reasons, like if someone wants to change their theme, they change it and suddenly they lose a whole bunch of functionality. It's silly. So that kind of thing should be in a plugin, yes. But it doesn't mean it won't work, obviously, because it does work. But it should be in a plugin if it's done properly. And if it's a client that's willing to give you a bit of leeway, I'd recommend you do that for them.
Let's say it's like a financial site, you've got lots of these application forms. Will it all go into one plugin, or each one a plugin?
It depends how you want to structure your data. It's up to you. what I would actually recommend is a fantastic plugin called Gravity Forms.
Yeah.
There's also one called Ninja Forms, which is free. Basically, you can create very complex custom forms that do anything you like. I recommend something like that, and that exists. You have to pay for Gravity Forms, but it is so worth it.
Yeah.
Saves. I mean, for me who likes coding and everything, instead of using a plugin like that, I still use it because it saves hours and hours and hours of work.
Yeah.
Is there any sort of dependency management in the plugins? Like, can I specify that, well, my plugin requires this one or that one or that one before?
Yeah,
it
you
actually
can.
runs?
There's a function I think is active plugin, and you can specify the plugin slug, and if that plugin is active, unfortunately it's based on the folder name the plugin is in. So if the user has changed the name of that folder for whatever reason, which they shouldn't, but if they have, then it won't work. So it's a bit risky. An easier way is to say if that plugin has a class in it, or say if class exists. It's an easier way to do it. More reliable, just because then users obviously can't go changing class names. So yeah, that's how you do it. That's how WooCommerce extensions work. There's a class inside them that'll check if WooCommerce itself is active, and if it's not, the extensions won't do anything.
So what's the latest version of WordPress now?
4.2 is coming out, I think, about around now or tomorrow.
Will it be compatible with Composer, so on?
I don't really know,
Not
to be
yet.
honest. I haven't really used Composer. I can't speak about that.
All right, cool.
Less of a sort of developer question in terms of like the WordPress marketplace. Is there opportunity there to write like plugins to actually like monetize and make money from?
Yeah, there's a I don't know if you guys know about the Envato marketplace. Theme Forest, yeah. It's not WordPress specific. They sell loads of stuff on there. They've got a very bad rap in a lot of ways for some good reasons, some bad reasons. But you can sell plugins and themes through that. Envato take a massive cut of the money. They take like 60% or something, and they set the price themselves. Yeah. But if you want to sit, so yeah, there's that. Otherwise, you can sell it. Just set up your own site and sell it there. That's the thing. But there's a big market for premium WordPress plugins. If you've got a good product and it's something that people want, like my podcasting plugin is free. It's on version 1.9.6 at the moment, but once I've sorted out version 2.0, which I'm busy working on, I'm going to start selling extensions for it. And I'll probably sell those through my own website or a site dedicated to the plugin, purely because I don't want to give anyone else half my money. But yeah, so if you've got something that people want, there's a big market for WordPress plugins. Themes people seem to be willing to pay for more than plugins. Like, people seem to have a thing that plugins should be free, which is bizarre. I think it's people think, oh, it's WordPress, therefore everything should be free, which doesn't make any sense. But that's how people think. So in some cases, just trying to break through that. Yeah.
People including
that's cool.
Yeah, I see even in the theme forest they have like a whole bunch of this includes this plugin in the themes. And that's how they get them to buy it, yeah.
They say this theme includes all these plugins, which are actually available for free on the repo.
Yeah.
But they include them in their theme for no reason. So when they update it on the repo, even if it's a massive security fix, it's not updated in the theme, and then your site's... It's crazy that people do that. And unfortunately, the theme forest review process isn't as strict as it should be. We've actually had a problem with people that are taking us, buying extensions from us, and then reselling them under their own name. Which is theoretically legal as long as they keep the same, as long as they do proper attribution of the code, so who was written by and everything. So it's theoretically legal, but it's actually against Theme Forest's guidelines. So if we see that, we contact them and they take it down, which is quite nice. But WordPress is licensed under the GPL, the General Public License, which basically means that if I wanted, I could sell WordPress and it'd be totally legal. No one would buy it, it'd be stupid, but I could. You can take any, and the thing with the GPL means any derivative works must also be under the GPL, whether it's stated or not. So any WordPress theme or plugin can effectively be sold by anyone, as long as you attribute the original author. So if you buy something from us, you can go and sell it for, like we often have that problem. People buy themes from us, then go and sell them for $5. But they buy it from us for like 80 or whatever the thing is. And that's legal, it's just very, very shady. I mean, come on. But it's technically legal, so there's nothing we can really do about it unless there's a brand name infringement.
I think you might have answered this, but is there anything to stop someone from buying your plugin that you spend a lot of time making, that you're selling, and then just like uploading it somewhere and saying, hey guys, you can just download this plugin for free?
If you search Woo themes on torrent sites, you'll find a lot of our stuff. Yeah. The problem is people do that and they put like massive security holes in them, and then you'll install them and they'll ping them and tell them that now you've got this plugin, and they'll come and hack your site. They'll put some obfuscated code or something.
Yeah. Sweet. You don't get all the updates and stuff.
Yeah, and also you don't get automatic updates. yeah, all that kind of stuff. So that's you can legally do that. With WordPress code or any WordPress plugin or theme, you can legally do whatever you want with it, as long as you say in the code it was written by this person under this license.
Oh, wait, if your plugin is GPL, then how can you sell it? Isn't that you open source?
No, open source doesn't necessarily mean free.
No, that's good news. It's the G.
You're at the end of the chain.
Yeah. Open source doesn't necessarily mean free. Open source just means you can see all the code, basically.
So
That's
like-
very like simplified way of saying that. But it basically means you can access all the code. The code isn't obfuscated in any way. You can see everything, but it doesn't necessarily mean free. I think GNU.
Yeah, the GNU one does forces you to have it open source.
I think I don't know, but basically, general public license. Basically, you can sell it, but it has to be open source. That's how it works. And also, anyone can resell it or give it away for free if they want.
So once someone's got it, they can do whatever they want.
Yeah. It sounds crazy, but it works. I promise it works.
No, but sometimes, like I think on Envato, there's a sign there, like if you want to purchase it, it says you can buy a single license or multiple license. So like a multiple license, you can charge many clients. So like what's the difference now between
How that works, we actually do it with our stuff as well. You can buy it for 1 site or 5 sites.
Yes,
or
that
20 sites or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's it gets progressively more expensive. The reason for that is we can never stop you. You can install it on as many sites as you like, so we can't stop you doing that.
Yeah.
That's not physical. We're not capable of doing that, and it'll also be against the GPL to do that. But what we do is when you buy something from us, and this is what most WordPress plugin and theme shops do these days, we'll offer you for 1 year, you'll get support from us for that product and updates for any update that comes out within that 12-month period. And after that 12 months expires, your license expires, you